You hold the deed to your house. It is a simple piece of paper or maybe like a digital file in a county registry somewhere.
Right, yeah.
But that document gives you this incredible sense of security. I mean, you basically assume it operates like gravity.
Oh, for sure. You figure the government has your name on file, and society just agrees that those specific square feet of the earth belong to you.
Yeah, but what happens when an invading army rolls into your city, forces your family out under the threat of artillery, and, well, simply prints a brand new deed handing your home to someone else?
The security vanishes instantly. You realize your paper deed was relying on an entire system of peace and, mutual agreement.
Right.
And when violence shatters that agreement, the paperwork basically becomes a weapon.
It really does. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are looking at the murky, chaotic world of stolen property in war zones.
Yeah, we have a lot to cover.
We really do. We are going to analyze two distinct sources that tackle this massive crisis from entirely different angles. One source is a rigorous theological treatise that examines property rights and restitution through the lens of ancient biblical law, specifically Exodus 22.
Oh.
And the other is a modern legal blueprint for untangling the staggering property crisis happening right now in the wake of the Ukraine-Russia war.
Right, so we are taking ancient divine law from Mount Sinai and modern international tribunals and seeing how they approach the same human crisis.
Yeah, the theft of a home.
It is a fascinating overlap, honestly. On one hand, you have ancient Hebrew grammar, covenant theology, and agrarian economics.
And on the other hand,
You have digital portals, international claims commissions, and the Hague regulations. But they are both trying to answer the same question. When an occupier steals a home, what does true, equitable restitution look like?
to really grasp how international courts handle stolen apartment buildings today, we have to start by establishing why stealing a home is wrong in the first place.
Yeah, we have to go to the root of it.
Right. Like, is property just a secular invention? If the state gives you the right to own a home, cannot the state just as easily take it away?
Well, the first source forcefully rejects that idea.
So let's unpack this. If we go back thousands of years to the foot of Mount Sinai, how does the biblical model flip the dynamic of who actually grants property rights?
It flips the dynamic completely by removing the state from the top of the hierarchy.
Interesting.
Because, if the state is the source of your property rights, then your rights are always subject to the whims of whoever controls the government.
That makes sense.
The theological source points us to the historical context of the Israelites at Mount Sinai. We had to think about who these people were at that moment.
They had just been liberated from Egypt, right?
Yeah, liberated from centuries of Egyptian bondage. And in the Egyptian system, Pharaoh owned the land, the resources, and the people.
Wow.
The Israelites did not just lack property, they legally were property. They had no ancestral lands, no legal recourse, and honestly, no concept of private ownership.
So they were essentially animated farming equipment.
That is a harsh but accurate way to frame it. Then God steps in as the great suzerain.
Oh, suzerain.
Yeah, in the ancient Near East, a suzerain was a supreme monarch who made a covenant with a vassal people. He essentially hands them a new constitution.
I see.
And the fundamental premise of this new constitution is that the land belongs to God. The text points to Leviticus 25.23, where God declares that the land shall not be sold forever because the land is his, and the people are strangers and sojourners with him.
Wait, if God owns it all, how is that practically different from Pharaoh owning it all? It sounds like they just traded a human dictator for a divine one.
Well, the difference is the character and the mandate of the owner. Pharaoh hoarded the earth to exploit his subjects.
Right.
God, according to the source, created the earth ex nihilo, out of nothing.
Mm.
Because he created the carbon atoms, the dirt, and the water.
Mm.
He holds the absolute prerogative to establish the rules.
And the source notes this demands a total rejection of evolutionary theory, right?
Absolutely. God is the sovereign creator. But instead of hoarding the world, he leases the earth to his image bearers for their flourishing. The state does not grant property. God delegates it to families.
So stealing is not just a horizontal crime against the person next door. It is a vertical crime against the divine landlord.
Precisely. And we see how radical this was when we look at other ancient Near Eastern laws.
Like what?
The source brings up the Code of Hammurabi. In Hammurabi's system, justice was scaled based on social class.
So different rules for different people.
Yeah. If you stole from a nobleman, the punishment was incredibly severe, often death. But if you stole from a peasant, the punishment was light. The value of the property was tied to the status of the person.
But God's law at Sinai is totally equitable.
Well, I should say, absolutely. The Eighth Commandment, thou shalt not steal, applies to everyone equally. The king cannot steal from the peasant, and the peasant cannot steal from the king.
And the literary context of the Book of the Covenant, which spans Exodus 21 through 23, applies that absolute moral rule to the dirt and livestock of daily life.
Yeah, it gets highly specific.
The source points out that property laws sit right next to laws concerning personal bodily injury. So, violence against a person's livelihood is treated as violence against their physical body.
Yes. To violently take a man's livelihood is to attack his existence.
That is a heavy thought.
It is. The theological text brings in the Westminster Confession, specifically chapter 23. This section states that God ordains civil magistrates to act under him to maintain piety, justice, and peace.
So they have a divine mandate.
Right. When a magistrate acts as a thief, when a government uses its authority to plunder rather than protect, it invokes divine wrath. The magistrate is supposed to act as God's servant for justice.
So when the state confiscates land unlawfully, it acts as a state-sponsored pirate.
That is a great way to put it.
That sets up a massive theological framework, but how did this operate on the ground?
What do you mean?
Well, if I am an Israelite farmer in 1400 BC, and my neighbor steals my livestock, what actually happens? The source mentions the if-then clauses in Hebrew syntax.
Yes, casuistic law.
Right. Let me offer a modern comparison. Today, the criminal justice system often asks how we can rehabilitate the offender. We look at the thief. But this ancient law seems intensely focused on the victim.
The biblical system is entirely focused on making the victim whole. The first major concept is multiplied restitution.
How multiplied?
Well, if a thief steals an ox and slaughters or sells it, the law demands fivefold restitution. 5 oxen for 1.
Wow.
If he steals a sheep and slaughters it, it is fourfold. If the animal is caught alive in his possession, it is twofold.
Okay, I have to challenge that. 5-fold restitution. That sounds completely disproportionate.
It does to modern ears, yeah.
I mean, if someone steals my sedan out of my driveway, justice does not seem to require them buying me 5 new sedans. Why would an equitable divine law demand such an extreme mathematical penalty?
To understand the math, you have to understand the agrarian economy. An ox is not just a sedan.
What is it then?
An ox is your tractor. It is the engine of your entire agricultural output. If your ox is stolen, you cannot plow your field.
And if you cannot plow your field, you cannot plant seeds.
Yeah, and if you cannot plant, your family starves the next winter. The economic ripple effect of stealing an ox is catastrophic. The thief is not just taking an animal. He is stealing your future harvest and your family's security.
Oh, I see. So the punishment has to account for the lost revenue, the lost time, and the sheer vulnerability inflicted on the victim.
Yes. And a sheep provides wool, which is ongoing income, plus milk and offspring. The source points out a brilliant linguistic detail here, too.
Oh, I love linguistic details. What is it?
The Hebrew word for restore is shalom. This is the intensive peel stem of the root verb shalom.
Okay, for those of us who did not take biblical Hebrew, what does an intensive peel stem actually do to a word?
It amplifies the action. It does not mean to simply hand an item back. It means to completely fulfill, to make entirely whole to the highest degree.
That makes sense.
You might recognize the root word shalom because it is connected to shalom, the word for peace. True peace, shalom, is impossible in a community without intensive restitution, shalom.
So you cannot just apologize, hand back a malnourished ox, and walk away while the victim is left dealing with the fallout.
No, the law requires making the victim completely whole.
That makes the focus on the victim crystal clear. The source also gets into the gritty details of self-defense, and it draws a sharp line based on the position of the sun.
Yeah, the day and night distinction.
It says if a thief breaks in at night and the homeowner strikes him and he dies, there is no blood guilt. But if the sun has risen, the homeowner does bear blood guilt. Why does the rotation of the earth change the morality of self-defense?
It comes down to the chaos of the dark versus the clarity of the daylight. Think about a home invasion in the ancient world. There are no streetlights. There is no 911 to call. Someone breaks through your mud brick wall in the pitch black. You have no idea if they are there to steal a bag of grain or to murder your family.
That would be terrifying.
The terrifying, uncertain threat to life in the darkness justifies lethal force. The homeowner is acting out of a chaotic necessity to preserve life.
But in the daylight, you can see the intruder. You can see he's just grabbing a tool and running away.
Right. In the daylight, you can assess the threat. If it is clearly just a threat to your property, Lethal force is forbidden.
Even for a thief.
Even a wicked thief bears the image of God.
Yeah.
You cannot use lethal force as a vigilante punishment just to protect your stuff. The law balances the sanctity of property with the absolute sanctity of human life.
The text also covers negligence, like if you start a fire to clear thorns on your property.
Oh yeah, the fire laws.
And the wind catches it and it burns down your neighbor's standing grain. You have to pay from the best of your own field. You cannot just shrug and blame the wind.
Carelessness is a violation of your neighbor's God-given boundaries. God demands his people be vigilant stewards.
That is a high bar.
It is. And when disputes arise, when trust is broken, the text commands that the cases go to the judges. What is really striking here is that the Hebrew text uses the word Elohim, the word for God, to describe these local magistrates.
Wait, they called the local judges God. That sounds dangerously close to idolatry.
I know, but it is not saying the judges are divine beings. In this specific syntactical context, it designates the magistrates as acting as God's direct representatives.
Oh.
Adjudicating property rights is a sacred duty. It makes a courtroom a sacred space. Stealing from a neighbor is an affront to God's throne, and the judges are there to uncover the truth and reestablish equity on God's behalf.
Well, if divine law demands that a single thief is held strictly accountable in the daylight, how on earth do we apply that standard when the thief isn't a single person breaking through a mud brick wall, but an entire invading army rewriting the registry?
That is the big question.
It brings us to the second source, which maps this framework of theft and justice onto the staggering modern crisis in Eastern Europe. The Ukraine-Russia war.
The scale is almost incomprehensible. The legal source notes that 14% of Ukraine's housing stock has been damaged or destroyed.
14%? That is wild.
We are talking about over 3 million households affected and an estimated $588 billion in recovery needs over the next decade.
To put 14% of a nation's housing stock into perspective, imagine every single house, apartment, and condo in a massive American state being wiped off the map.
It is a staggering level of destruction.
When an invading army rolls in, forces a family out, and signs a new piece of paper giving that house to someone else, how do modern law and biblical law view that new, deed?
Both sources align perfectly on this point. The occupying deeds are null and void.
It's completely invalid.
Yes, the theological text calls these deeds a codified lie. A thief cannot grant legal title. Just because an invading force sets up a desk and uses a notary stamp does not make their theft legitimate.
No amount of paperwork changes the reality.
Right. The theological source explicitly denounces the idea of letting bygones be bygones for the sake of an artificial peace. You cannot have shalom based on a lie.
And the legal and policy text backs this up with international law, right? It references the 1907 Hague Regulations and the Fourth Geneva Convention.
Yeah, if we look at the history of international law, the rule is clear. Before the 20th century, conquering armies routinely pillaged and claimed absolute ownership of whatever they took.
It was just the spoils of war.
Well, yes, that was the mindset. But the Hague Regulations and the Geneva Convention were designed to stop that. Occupying powers have temporary factual control. They do not have sovereign ownership.
There's a big difference there.
A huge difference. The Fourth Geneva Convention specifically forbids an occupying power from confiscating private property or transferring parts of its own civilian population into the occupied territory.
The legal source uses a phrase that feels incredibly dark, documentary aggression. What does that actually look like for a family living under occupation?
Documentary aggression is basically the weaponization of bureaucracy. It works step by step. First, the occupier creates an environment of terror through shelling and filtration camps.
So families naturally flee for their lives.
Right. Then the occupation authority walks up to that vacant home and administratively classifies it as ownerless.
Because the owners fled the artillery fire. That is so cynical.
It really is. They create the displacement through violence, and then they use that displacement as an administrative excuse. Next, they pressure the remaining locals to take Russian passports in order to access basic health care or food.
Wow.
Finally, they take the ownerless homes and transfer them to incoming loyalists, settlers, or occupation officials.
It is using the boring machinery of civil law to launder military conquest. You convert displacement into abandonment and then treat abandonment as a legal basis for confiscation.
It is a highly sanitized form of theft. It looks legal on paper, but the foundation is built entirely on coercion.
Which creates a massive logistical nightmare for the tribunals coming afterward. I mean, it is easy for us to sit here in a studio and declare that stolen deeds are invalid, but let's look at the actual burden of proof.
That is where it gets incredibly complicated.
Imagine trying to prove you own your car after the DMV, your paper title, your physical driver's license, and your keys have all been vaporized in a fire.
It sounds impossible.
How do you actually prove who owns an apartment when the paper archive burned to the ground in Bucha and the local registry server has been hacked or wiped? Does the legal framework just accept that millions of people are out of luck, or is there a workaround?
Peacetime courts demand a perfect chain of title. You need the original deed with the original signatures. But wartime attacks evidence just as efficiently as it attacks buildings.
That is a terrifying thought.
Ukraine has mobilized some incredible digital tools to fight this, though. They have the DIA portal and the e-recovery program.
How does that work?
Through the DIA app on their phones, citizens can report damage, submit claims, and access digital versions of their documents. It has already provided repair funds or housing certificates to over 100,000 families. The digital trail is a huge advantage.
But relying on a smartphone app during a war seems risky. I mean, what if you are an 80-year-old grandmother in a rural village without cell service? Or what if your phone was confiscated at a checkpoint?
That is the danger of digital exclusion. You cannot demand peacetime proof from wartime victims, and you cannot demand digital fluency from a traumatized elderly population.
So what do they do?
That is why the legal blueprint insists that local administrative service centers and mobile notaries are essential. You have to meet the victims where they are.
The legal text suggests tribunals use something called an evidentiary basket. If the formal deed is gone, how does a tribunal practically weigh alternative evidence against a forged Russian stamp?
Tribunals need to accept alternative proof to reconstruct the title. Think about it. What else proves you lived in that house for 20 years?
Utility bills.
Yes, utility bills, local tax receipts, pre-war photographs of your family sitting in the living room, testimony from your neighbors, and satellite imagery showing the house before the attack.
Oh, satellite imagery is a good one.
The tribunal takes all of this and puts it into the evidentiary basket. The goal is to prevent the occupier from benefiting from the destruction of the formal proof. If the occupier burned the archive, the tribunal will accept the utility bill.
What about transactions that actually happened during the occupation? Let's say a family is trapped and they decide to sell their house to an incoming settler just to get enough cash to bribe their way out of the territory.
Yeah, forced sales.
How do you prove a sale was forced? If someone signs a contract while a tank is parked down the street, that is obviously not a free market transaction, but it has signatures on it.
The legal text provides specific coercion indicators. A tribunal does not need a written threat to infer that coercion took place under an unlawful military regime. They look for massive red flags.
Like what kind of red flag?
Was the house sold for a price far below market value? Did the sale happen immediately after the original owner was detained or interrogated by occupation forces?
That would be a huge giveaway.
Right. Was the transaction processed by an occupation notary, or was the property transferred directly to an occupation official? If those indicators are present, the tribunal presumes the transaction was coerced and invalidates the sale.
The text also dives into the grim reality of wartime probate. War creates sudden deaths and disappearances, whole families are separated, and the normal legal mechanisms for handling inheritance completely broke down.
It is an administrative nightmare built on top of heavy human grief. You might have a situation where a home was legally in a mother's name. She is killed in a missile strike.
Okay.
In peacetime, her children would go through a formal probate process to inherit the title. But in war, there might not be a functioning court or even a coroner to issue a death certificate.
That is devastating.
Her children should not be erased from a property claim just because a wartime death interrupted the paperwork. The legal blueprint argues that courts need to issue provisional heir certificates, simplifying the inheritance procedures so the surviving family can at least submit a claim to the restitution tribunals.
That brings us to the hardest cases. The empty, destroyed houses are an engineering problem. The hardest cases are when the rightful owner returns and another family is already living inside.
Yeah, these are heartbreaking.
Let me pose a specific dilemma from the text. Imagine a displaced Ukrainian family fleeing a destroyed city in the east. They have nothing. They travel west to survive the brutal winter and take shelter in an empty home.
Okay, I am picturing it.
Months later, the region stabilizes and the original owner returns to their house. You have two traumatized families standing on the same porch. How does a just society handle this without turning desperate people into criminals?
This is where the legal framework demands absolute clarity by separating title from shelter. The blueprint establishes a strict hierarchy of claims.
Who is at the top of that hierarchy?
The preoccupation owner has the strongest legal claim. Full stop. Fleeing a war zone or surviving deportation is not abandonment. The owner's right to their title remains supreme, and they must receive their home back.
But you cannot just order armed police to throw a freezing family out into the snow. That creates a secondary humanitarian disaster.
No, you cannot. And this is the delicate balance. Vulnerable secondary occupants like the sheltering family you described must receive humanitarian protection.
From the state.
The state, aided by international organizations, needs to provide relocation assistance, rental support, or temporary social housing. However, their humanitarian need does not grant them the title to the stolen home.
I see.
You do not solve one tragedy by finalizing the theft of another family's property. Humanitarian protection must not be purchased with a victim's land.
We need to clarify the distinction the source makes between restitution and compensation. People use those words interchangeably, but they are completely different mechanisms.
They answer different injuries. Restitution restores the actual legal title and physical possession. It puts the person back in their home, with their name legally recognized on the deed. It nullifies the occupier's theft.
And compensation.
Compensation pays for what is physically destroyed or practically unrecoverable. If your house is a crater, restitution of the title to a patch of dirt is not enough. You need compensation to rebuild the walls. Ukraine needs both functioning together.
The source outlines the international architecture being built to handle this. There is the Register of Damage for Ukraine, which is operating out of The Hague, and it has already received over 150,000 claims.
That is a massive volume.
And there is a planned International Claims Commission. How do all these moving parts avoid stepping on each other?
Coordination is the biggest hurdle. You have domestic payouts, like Ukraine's e-recovery program funding emergency repairs. Then you have the potential for an international commission awarding compensation, perhaps using frozen Russian assets.
Sounds complicated.
There needs to be a transparent, unified ledger. You have to prevent double recovery. You cannot have someone getting paid twice for the same broken window by two different agencies, because that drains the pool of funds available for other victims.
That makes total sense.
The goal is the biblical concept of shalom, ensuring the victim is made completely whole, but not unjustly enriched at the expense of others.
We have looked at macro-level international tribunals, evidentiary baskets, and the Hague regulations, but the theological source drives us all the way down to the micro-level of the human heart.
Yeah, it takes a very different turn here.
Why does this endless cycle of theft, conquest, and forged registries happen in the first place? The theological source argues that this geopolitical conflict is the external manifestation of the internal covetousness condemned in the Ten Commandments.
That is the root issue, right?
I want to look at the theological conclusion of the Exodus 22 analysis. It talks about Christological fulfillment and substitutionary atonement. For someone who is not sitting in a seminary classroom, what do those concepts actually mean in the context of stolen property?
The theological source makes a massive shift from the civil courts on earth to the courtroom of heaven. Let's go back to the law of multiplied restitution.
Okay, the 5 oxen.
Right, requiring 5 oxen for 1 stolen ox sets an incredibly high standard for justice. On a spiritual level, the text argues that humanity has robbed God.
How so?
We have taken the life, the resources, and the time he gave us, and we have used them to violate his boundaries. We are the thieves. And by the strict standard of divine equity, our spiritual debt is infinite.
We are entirely bankrupt. We cannot pull 5 oxen out of thin air to pay off a debt against an infinite creator.
Precisely. We have no mechanism to achieve shalom on our own. This is where the text introduces Jesus Christ as the ultimate restorer.
What does that look like practically?
He lived a life of perfect obedience. He never coveted. He never defrauded his neighbor. He perfectly upheld the Eighth Commandment. On the cross, he acted as the substitute.
Substitutionary atonement.
Yes. Substitutionary atonement means he stepped into the place of the thief and paid the infinite debt he did not owe.
The source references Psalm 69.4, which is a fascinating verse. Then I restored that which I took not away.
That verse captures the mechanics of grace beautifully. Christ restores the honor and justice to God that humanity stole, even though Christ himself took nothing.
Wow.
The text points out that this completely satisfies divine justice. It does not sweep the theft under the rug. It pays the penalty in full.
This stands in total contrast to any religious system that requires human merit or good works to slowly pay off the debt of sin.
And the gospel actually changes the internal desires of the thief. The law can put you in jail, but it cannot make you stop loving the thing you stole.
That is so true. The heart has to change.
The source uses the story of Zacchaeus the tax collector from Luke chapter 19. Zacchaeus was literally an agent of an occupying empire. He was.
He was a Jewish man working for the Romans, using his administrative position to extort his own people. He is the ancient equivalent of an occupation official signing forged deeds.
Zacchaeus is the perfect case study for this. When Jesus comes to his house, salvation enters his life. And look at his spontaneous reaction.
What does he do?
Zacchaeus does not offer a vague apology. He does not suggest a generalized humanitarian fund. He goes straight to the mathematics of Exodus 22. He says, "If I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold."
He voluntarily submits himself to the most punitive restitution standard.
Because true faith produces radical honesty. When the heart is changed, the immediate desire is to make the victim whole. Zacchaeus no longer views his wealth as his own. He views it through the lens of divine justice.
The theological source concludes with this idea of a reformed premillennial anticipation of Christ's return. What does a future kingdom of perfect equity look like, and why does the text bring it up at the end of a paper on property law?
It brings it up because human tribunals, as necessary as they are, will always fall short.
Registries will burn.
Evidence will be lost. Some thieves will die comfortable in stolen homes. The premillennial anticipation is the belief that Christ will physically return to earth to establish a kingdom.
A physical kingdom.
Yes, and he will rule with perfect equity. He will bypass all these corrupt human empires, nullify every codified lie, and strip the wicked of their plunder. In the end, final justice does not rest in The Hague, it rests in his hands. Human courts are just shadows of the perfect justice to come.
This has been an incredibly dense and rewarding conversation.
It really has.
To bring all of these threads together, the right to own a home is not a modern capitalist invention or a temporary gift from a secular state. It is a divine mandate delegated by the Creator.
Spot on.
When an occupying army attempts to rewrite property registries and use bureaucracy as a weapon, they are not just breaking international treaties like the Geneva Convention. They are violating the immutable justice of God. Restitution is not an optional diplomatic talking point to be traded away at a peace summit. It is a moral necessity.
The victims must be made whole. Whether we are looking at the dirt of ancient Israel or the concrete of modern Eastern Europe, the principle remains steadfast.
We want to leave you with a final consideration about stewardship. Both texts, in their own specific contexts, assert that God holds the absolute title deed to the entire earth.
We are just tenants.
We are simply leasing our possessions from him. Think about the things you call your own today: your house, your bank account, your land, your vehicle.
It changes your perspective.
If you are holding those things as a temporary steward rather than an absolute monarch, how does that alter the way you treat your neighbor's boundaries tomorrow? Remember that piece of paper, that deed we talked about at the very beginning? It might burn in a filing cabinet. An invading army might try to shred it. A hacker might wipe the server. But the moral reality of who that land belongs to is written in a registry that no artillery shell can ever reach. Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking.